Great. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Kate. Darabalinya Badu Warajri Yawanadi Glenn Loughrey Gawambana Yaradu Marang. What I just said to you in my own Wiradjuri language was, I'm proud to be Wiradjuri. My name is Glenn Loughrey, and Gawambana means welcome, and Yaradu Marang means good day. Good day, mate. So they're part of our normal sort of language processes, and of talking to people about country as the first signifier of identity. We signify ourselves by what country we come from, and then our individual identity becomes secondary to that. So it's a part of how First Nations people speak, introduce, identify, and connect. So we're all on country. I'm here on the country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge this particular space. I acknowledge their elders who have cared for this space, and I acknowledge that we're all on different pieces of First Nations country around the land we now call Australia, and I acknowledge the elders of those places that you're on, and I acknowledge the history that sits there. I also would like to acknowledge, and I'm not sure if there are any First Nations people on the group this afternoon, but if there is, I would like to acknowledge them and their particular countries as well. My task this afternoon is to talk about my art, and that is in many ways a very difficult thing to do because I'm a relatively newcomer to art. I never did art at all as a child. I didn't start doing art until 2012. And as I am youthfully challenged, that was quite later in life. I didn't grow up in a family that was identifying as Indigenous or as Wiradjuri. So I didn't grow up with the stories and the transmission of knowledge that normally comes from somebody growing up inside a mob-focused family. Ours wasn't that, for a whole lot of historical reasons. And if you read my last book on being Blackfellas Young Fella, it explains a little about why my history is the way it is and why I don't have that traditional capacity or the capacity to tell traditional stories. That's out of respect for the fact that it would be secondhand for me to do that, because no one passed those stories on to me directly. And it would be appropriating the stories for my own use, and that would be wrong. And I stay away from telling stories in that manner. My art began because I'd been to Borneo. I was at Lindisfarne Anglican Grammar School in northern New South Wales, and we used to take students to Borneo and walk the Sandakan to Ranau death march, where 2,500 Australian soldiers died at the end of the Second World War. And it was a very emotional and a very draining journey to take, year 10 and 11 and 12 students on. Coming back from that, somebody said, you write poetry and you do other things. Can you draw? Or if you can draw, we might do a little book. And I'd never drawn in my entire life. That was 2012. So I did some sketches, took those sketches off to the art teacher at the school, a wonderful young lady called Belinda Hope. And she looked at them and said, I like your lines. I wasn't sure what that meant or what she was saying. And she said, you should do art. And I said, how do I do art? She said, you get a big piece of canvas, fill it full of paint, see what happens, keep on doing it until you find your practice, and then practice your practice every day. That was my one and only art lesson. No, nothing else. There was no discussions of color wheels and all of those kind of things. It was just, that was my art lesson. So I started painting 2012. And when I came to Melbourne, I continued to do so, but I thought, oh, I should probably go and do some art lessons. So I contacted the gentleman in charge of the Melbourne Art School, and he came out and had a look at my art, and he said, I don't want to touch you. What you do is special, and what you do is your type of art. If you came and saw me, I'd spoil what you do. So I just started doing art. I started in probably a fairly typical way, doing abstract, dribble art, dropping pieces of art onto a canvas. And then I started using a kebab stick and creating marks on the canvas, firstly in dot form and then into line form, and then began the journey of actually engaging with the canvas as country and having a conversation, which brings about a whole new sets of stories. We might go to the first slide, please. Next one. We'll go to the next one, Kate.
Just give me a sec. I'm getting there.
That's all right. And I while Kate's doing that, when I came to Melbourne, I started to paint, and somebody said to me I should. I got an invitation to put a piece of work into the Doug Moran Portrait Prize. So I created a piece of art for myself, a self-portrait, because I don't know anybody else. The only person I know reasonably well is myself, so I painted myself. And I put that into the Doug Moran Portrait Prize. A, it was the first portrait I'd ever painted, and B, it was the first competition I ever went into, and C, I was the finalist. And that was an amazing recognition and affirmation, and allowed me to develop the courage to continue doing art. And since then, I've been a finalist in the Mandorla, the Paddington, and the Blake. I don't do competitions that much. I do send stuff into them, but those have been sort of quite an achievement for me as somebody who'd never started art until 2012. And I'm very, very proud of those things. And I think the kind of quotes that we're sitting on here is really important when we can start to consider art. Thomas Merton, who I admire. Art enables us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. One of the amazing capacities of art, if you don't try to over-design it, is it allows you to get completely lost in a space on a canvas. And then when you step back from it, you find a whole lot of things about yourself that you didn't know were there because it's just started to appear in the art. I don't plan any piece of art that I do outside of some basic parameters. I want the canvas, the kebab stick, and the paint to begin to express themselves and tell story. And much of my art is, if you stand close enough to it and further away from it as well, you'll see a whole range of stories. And it picks up that Aboriginal concept about story. Every story can be told many times over and teach many different lessons. It's Aboriginal pedagogy. There's an introductory level into any story, but then there will be the PhD level at the back of that story that you get to when you're ready to get to that stage. And painting's the same. Aboriginal art is the same as that. Yes, it looks pretty, but if you stay with it as long as you can and keep revisiting it, it will take you deeper and deeper into the layers of knowledge and wisdom sitting underneath it. It's a stratified way of telling story. And that is what I try and find in my art. It allows us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. It's a very powerful way of thinking about it. Bernstein's also right. Art never stopped a war. They can't change events, can't fix things, but it can change people. It can affect people so that they are change in a different way. So I have no experiences of my art doing that for people, except for what Tony said before and others who've seen those windows in the cathedral and say that they are a spiritual moment, a cathartic moment when they get to see the interaction between the Western ideology and spirituality inside of the great cathedral and the simplicity of Aboriginal storytelling and country all at the same time. So I think that does make that, and Bernstein is absolutely on the money. It doesn't change events, but it can change us as people, as we tell story, as we listen to story, as we read Aboriginal art. You don't look at Aboriginal art, just looking at it is of no value to you. You have to spend time with it so you read it and it reads you. And actually it reads you first and then tells you what level you're at inside the painting, and it starts to unfold itself over time. People often look at my art and go, oh, that's lovely. And I said, no, you realize that's taken me 3.5 months to paint. For you to fully understand that painting, you need to give it at least 3.5 months of viewing at different times of the day, different days of the week, after you got out of bed, before you go to bed, when you're feeling tired, when you're feeling angry. You have to sit with it in all those different emotions and moments that I would have sat with as I painted it. And you have to give it the time. I mean, I think there's been a survey done that says the average time people spend in front of a painting in galleries is 3 minutes. Now, I can't have that on a regular basis, that you have to sit with art to understand it. And particularly Aboriginal art, because it's First Nations art, because it's talking from a different pedagogical place and a different way of understanding the world. So you can't just look at it with your Western eyes. The longer you stay with it, the more your eyes become less that Western intellectual look and becomes more of that kinesthetic or relationship-based way of seeing things. So you just can't walk into an art gallery of Aboriginal art and judge it on the ideas you bring with yourself as a Western person. You have to be able to shift and move. We'll go to the next one, Kate, please. See, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith, it's there, and the opposite of life. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifferent. If you're indifferent to a piece of art, it doesn't matter how good it is, it's never going to work. If you haven't gone in there to be changed by that piece of art, you'll be indifferent to it, and it will look in many ways ugly, not pretty, not eloquent. because you are indifferent to what you see. You don't care. Doesn't matter. Does it look pretty? Does it go with the lounge? Will it sit nicely on the wall above the lounge? Does it go with the color scheme in the lounge room? That's indifference. You put the art up because it changes you and has the potential to change others. Picasso talks about the fact, and this is one of the important things about art as country, is that it's a receptacle for emotions that come from all over the place. And often when you're painting, and for me anyway in particular, I'm never quite sure where those emotions come from, but they appear in the piece of art. They appear in the shapes, the forms, the patterns. My art is about patterns. It's about making marks that have developed patterns. Aboriginal people are, First Nation people are a pattern people. Things are connected to this, to this, to that. There is a pattern to things. If this occurs, that follows. If you don't listen to country, therefore you'll mistreat country. As a young Aboriginal friend of mine says, there's no climate change, only the inability to hear country, the inability to listen to country. So it's a case of thinking about how do we listen to those places and how do we hear those places and how do those places and how do we let go of the need to control the piece of art so that those things appear on their own inside the art. For me, I can't control the outcome of what goes on the canvas. I have to let it be free to go into the places it wants to go, where it wants to tell me to go. And I was painted a very large piece for Auburn South Primary School and did all the things that necessary. And when I stood back and had a look at the sky, there was this image of a swimmer that was built out of the lines that made out of the sky. And it was, the school is next to Gardeners Creek and the Yarra River. And so obviously there's some story in that ground around there about the connection with those rivers and the swimming inside knowledge. It's primary school. When the river is where you go and swim in knowledge. But I would never have thought of that. That came up in the art. I stepped back and said, oh, hello, where did you come from? And that is what my art's about, is that capacity to allow the canvas and the paint and the ancestors, the ancestral beings, to make their presence felt. It's interesting, when I first started painting in this manner, there would often be, in my paintings, the faces of ancestors. They're not there so much now. They probably don't feel the need to be there now. They probably believe now that I'm far enough down the journey that but in the 2015s and 16s and 17s, they were there inside you would see their faces, their shape. They're not there anymore. And they're not a part of my art, but they are. And I think it's that place where I've come to, is that I'm now able just to get on and do it. I don't need them to remind me that this is bigger than just an individual's desire to paint or an individual's desire to be noticed. They don't need to remind me of that anymore. I've learnt that rule and learnt that process as part of what I do. So art for me is this process of Winangara or Dardidi, listening, hearing, and reflecting, and just going with the flow. It is what it is, it will be what it will be, and just let my art do its own thing. And I can tell you, on the very worst of days, a couple of hours in the studio and I'm almost feeling normal when I leave, because somehow it washes away those processes. It's interesting also that much of my paint art has something to do with water, because that concept of swimming in knowledge and wisdom is an important one as well. Every element has its role in our cultural world. We'll go to the next one, which is a very simple slide. As you may know, over the last 7 or 8 months, I've travelled around Australia advocating for the voice, trying to educate people about the statement from the heart and educate people about the importance of voting yes. I'm not sure whether I did it good or a bad. Disappointing. And for me, art inside the referendum is that I haven't actually painted that much that is referendum focused or the voice focused. That piece of art for Auburn South, which took 4 or 5 months to do. But for some people, responding to the results of the years pays quite a lot of art that talk about the importance of the concepts of art. But one of the things about referendum now, but going forward, art will play an important part in keeping alive the possibility of the ideas in that, to keep bringing those back in front of people's eyes and minds, and that will be non-Indigenous artists. Will be able to paint that will have an important role in doing that. One of the themes artists is not so much that that's a protest art, but that is art of beauty, of welcome, of invite, of bringing people into the conversation. Not so much. We'll go to the next slide. I did a series over the years of paintings that related to this. And this one was painted in, it's actually called COVID 1770, what happened when Cook sneezed. And it was one of those paintings that talks about the that the church and others were complicit in maintaining, and the massacre sites that went across Australia and moved out through down the center of those little lines. They've got yellow lines on either side and white dots down them, eradicate the virus, but we have controlled it and kept it. Is basically the fact that can you not hear me?
The headphones. Let's try that one.
Glenn, there's a little bit of delay.
No,
I've got somebody who's people who are not muted, and because I've hidden them, just okay.
You're right now?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Is it Okay, so that the colonialism, colonization continues in our country, and it has never gone away. And the referendum would show very clearly that in a way that will allow us to come together as one, and with the predominance of the cross sitting in the middle, tells us that story. And it was my experience of being on the road is that churches of all denominations and varieties weren't prepared to fully support. There may have been some statements by around the majority of people were, and it was not much else we can do about that. That we still haven't been able to manage this virus, and it was very difficult to deal with. And it was result of the referendum. See, the country has still is here and doesn't go away. We'll go to the next slide.
Did that go ahead?
This slide was called, yep. This slide was this painting was part of a series I did on taking some of the biblical stories and putting them in the Australian scene. And at Easter, and the two fellows disappeared into down the road, and Jesus meets them, shares a meal, and they discover and they come back. They meet 17 when Turnbull had said no to statement from the heart and a voice. So this painting has 3 or 4 significant ruds of apology. You're continuing on. It's the road to know where we
Glenn,
hadn't came to a place where we found our way back. So this is a road to Emmaus, which is still going on. This was painted in 2017, and it is still as relevant today as a blackness, a big black hole where nothing's come together. And we haven't found a way to resolve the situation so that we can sit together. So that painting talks about the journey that we remain on now. So one, and it remains prophetic. We are in, please.
Glenn, you're really breaking up quite a lot. Is there anything you can do at your end? I notice you're using earbuds. It's related to that, or is
I don't know.
your video internet connection strong?
Hello. Hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, and there's a little bit of echo as well with your I'm going to say something again.
How's that? Hello?
Hey, that's all right.
Hang on. Put my earphones away.
Okay. Can you hear me, Kate?
That's good. It kind of comes and goes, but all of those words were clear. So let's hope that. Oh, hang on. You just muted yourself. You just muted yourself, Glenn. There.
Sorry, folks. I'm in a place where we have the NBN, no bloody network, and it's right in the middle of Melbourne. It's annoying. So that painting really picks up the sense of that we're continuing on a journey that has not been resolved. Can we go to the next one, Kate, please? This one is was painted when the Aboriginal flag was taken over by the Commonwealth, which was everybody thought was a great idea. But what it meant was, again, the Commonwealth owned the flag. We don't own the flag. The Commonwealth own the flag. They might generously give somebody some money, but in reality, they now own the flag. It's owned by the Commonwealth of Australia. So it picks up the idea that white possessiveness is really a key part of colonisation in Australia. Non-Indigenous people want to possess us and the things about us. That is why we're always talked about as being the oldest living culture, not about us as people. We're never referred to, and us as people are not valued, but our oldest living culture is, because it's a property, it's something that can be taken. And in the referendum was a very visible example of possessiveness. Everybody who thought they had a voice in Australia spoke up with their opinions, from Frank Brennan down, left, centre. They all had a saying about whether this was a good idea, this was a bad idea. They all possessed what was an invitation from Aboriginal people. They possessed what we offered and turned it against us in the process. And that one of the things that we hear from people all the time was that it was confusing. No, it wasn't confusing, but people, and some of them good, well-meaning people, possessed the discussion and the argument and took it in such a way that it disrupted or dispersed the process and brought about a no. One of the things that our country has the capacity to do all the time is to possess something, to possess it, to take it away from those for whom it is their right to own. We put up an invitation. Instead of that invitation being accepted, that invitation was discussed by everybody who had an opinion and who thought they knew better than we did. When I used to do presentations, what would happen at the end when I asked for a Q&A was that I would mostly get people who wanted to tell me what they thought, what they wanted. They possessed the discussion, hadn't listened to a word I said, just waited for the opportunity to possess and fill out the space, and therefore drown out our voices. And that was what Dutton and the Murdoch press did with Mundine and Price. They gave them the permission to possess the story, and two people defeated 80% of Australian Aboriginals who wanted the voice. They were the black police, the native police that dispersed the locals. And it's possession of stealing something and continuing to steal something and continuing to take it away. I shared a platform with Frank Brennan, and his opinions and his ideas, while he said he was for the voice, sowed seeds of doubt and played an important role in impacting the outcome of the referendum, particularly inside the conservative Christian area. And so this whole process, and now as a result of the no, we remain fully the possession, even more so. We are more possessed than we were before, because we have been dispersed. And if you read David Smarr's book on Killing for Country, you'll understand what that means. And that's what's happened here. This has been I read David's book, and in reality, my art in his book, we're still stuck in the 1840s, and we've moved no further. And the same methods of dispersion have occurred. We'll go quickly on to the next bits, otherwise we'll run out of time. Are you hearing me? Every image embodies a way of seeing. Our perception or appreciation of an image depends upon our way of seeing. And that's one of the challenges when we're looking at Aboriginal art or art done by an Aboriginal person, is we have to separate ourselves from our own individual worldview, that which we've been trained to look at through the academy. I spent 12 months at the university in ANU in Canberra teaching researchers to look differently when they go out to do research on country. Why would you look at it like the academic teaching model teaches you out of a Western paradigm? When you're in the middle of a very different world, you have to shift the way you see. John Burgess also says that every painting has an address. It's contextual. It sits in a space and a place. Art as country, art as a way of expressing country, art as a way of engaging with country is very important. It's what I do, and it's what Aboriginal people do, and First Nations people do when they paint. We'll go to the next one. It's hard to see on that there, but that's all just simply lines going across a paper that slowly build into a pattern. It's the story of the three sisters and three brothers, the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. And it's this pattern of story that rises up and shows that life is never reliable. It changes. What used to look big and important disappears and something else takes over. And like in a lot of my art, it has much negative space, because for me, the light always comes from behind, not in front, and it comes out and shows up the patterns in the story. There is empty space at the top of the painting because it tells you that you don't see everything. There's a great mystery in life. And there's three birds, three eagles, three brothers in this case. But are they three birds? You know, is there a spiritual element in this painting? Is there a spiritual element in how the lines are put together? Well, I don't know. Maybe there is. Depends from where you look at it. But it tells the story, you know, and when I painted it, a lady just looked at it once and said, I'm buying that because I lived there, and that is exactly what my story about those mountains are like. Pop on to the next one. We need to finish in 3 minutes. Is that right?
Glenn, feel free to take a bit longer. It doesn't have to finish at 3:30.
Okay, we'll go to the next couple, and then that will finish.
There you go.
Okay, I spent quite a lot of time working with the Water Justice Hub in the ANU in Canberra, where I'm an associate professor, and the Institute of Water Futures. And one of the things that we were looking at, because I was in Wilkenya in New South Wales, which is where I go to most of the time, into 2021, just as the water began to flow down the Barker after 8 or 9 years of no water at all. And when I was out there, you could walk right across the Menindee Lakes. There was not a drop of water in it. It was empty. And when you went to Kenya, there was no water to drink. You're drinking bottled water. You had to bring your bottled water with you. There was just nothing. And the town was in a desperate state. And I had to create a painting for the Water Futures, Institute of Water Futures, to go in as part of a commission as my residency with them. So we painted this painting, which is Healthy River, Healthy Country. One of the things I do with those two institutes is when we go to a conference, I actually paint papers, paint the stories, paint as people talk, paint the ideas, and then present it back to them. And I did that with an exhibition called Aqua When, which talks about this whole process, when we're going to get water back on country. And this is a painting that says, if they've got a healthy river, bright blue, well, you know, if you've ever been to the Barker River in Kenya, it's never going to be bright blue. But the idea was to try and tell the idea of what a healthy river, and around it is the country and the animals. You've got down the bottom, you've got goannas, that's what backward facing E's are. You've got kangaroos, you've got goannas, you've got people. And if you blew that painting up, you'll see a whole lot of other images of people sitting by the river, feeling safe at the river. You've got the sky, you've got the three birds again, and you've got a work boot sitting over the top of the Southern Cross. When I paint Aboriginal people, I paint them walking on country with what looks like an eyelash, which is a little bow with 5 little lines coming out of them, which is their toes. But when I paint Westerners on country, it's a boot, because they just step on top of everything. I don't know what's underneath it. They just step on it. So here they're stepping on the Southern Cross. So this is telling a story about, if we look after the river, there'll be fishing, there'll be food, there'll be engagement, there'll be animals coming back onto country, which aren't there now. When I went back there in 2022, the river was running at 9 meters, and nobody could still drink any of the water or swim in the river, because it was so poisoned that it was unsuitable to drink. You couldn't even feed it to your horses. And people were still living off bottled water, even though there were 9 meters of water in the river. I launched just recently a 5-year project to be able to look at and assess the quality of water in these communities. There are 600 sites around Australia where there is no potable water by the UN standards. 600 sites in Australia. We're a first world country. Quite crazy, really. So that's what I do. Next one. This one I did, this is the one I did recently. And again, you can't see it terribly well, but it's a large painting that picks up how do we learn on country as Aboriginal people. And in the center of that painting, you'll see some dots going in a sort of circular motion around the top, and there's a bit of white empty space there around it. And what it's telling the story of is that in our Aboriginal culture is that we're born out of the ground from under a tree, which you can see on the right, as you look at it on the left-hand side of the painting, and you go around that tree to the next tree, which is a tree under which you die. So you're born out of the ground under a tree, and you go back into the ground. When you're born out of the ground, and in this painting, that little line goes all the way down to the bottom, you bring with you all the knowledge and the wisdom that has been put into the ground by those people who've gone before you. So you bring with you the wisdom into your learning process. And for these children at this school, you go up, you go to prep, you go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you go back into the ground, and you leave some of that in the ground underneath that, underneath that school, and then you move off into high school and you take it with you and you build on it again. So you have that vocation of learning, honouring, bringing and resolving some of the issues that are in the ground and not putting any more back. It's a Aboriginal vocation, circular motion, because we do everything in circles. So this painting goes into the school, and you can't see it there, but across the top, that's where the swimmer is. But this painting takes into consideration the context in which the place is put, but the purpose for which the school is there, which is to help people to be able to grow, mature, and put back, and then to move on and do that as a repeated process throughout their lives. Sorry, so my art is really about trying to connect to country, to story, not in what is called traditional. We have to be careful of that word traditional. We have a garden here at St Oswald's, which we started in 2015. It's been there 8 years and is now seen by the local elders as one of the 5 significant cultural sites in the Boroondara Shire Council area, and it's only been there 8 years. We have to be careful of what we talk about when we do tradition and traditional thinking. Traditions are only as good as the particular use at the time. We've been here 65,000 years, and I would think there'd be very few traditions that connect back that far. And many of our traditions have had to adapt to deal with the way things are. And art has been one of those. And there's lots of us who paint in this non-traditional method. People come into the art gallery and go, "Where's all the traditional art?" And I said, "It's on the walls, silly." No, they want to see stuff that comes out of Central Desert, because that's what they think is traditional art. Which I always find funny, because I've been constantly told that, one of the problems with the voice was that there are so many different nations. How can you all come together and have one point of view? But you expect us all to paint in the same way. And you go, "Well, not every Aboriginal agrees with the voice." And I go, "Do you expect them to? Really? I mean, you ever come to one of our mob gatherings? We don't agree on anything." And I have to say to them, "Look, not everybody understands that South Sydney is the only rugby league team to follow. Some have other opinions, but we don't deny them the right to have those opinions." That was really interesting. So I don't know whether that's what you wanted. I hope it was helpful. And I think what I want you to go away with is to reflect on how you actually engage with First Nations art and what you expect from it, and how do you actually view it? How do you actually allow it to speak to you?
Lovely. Thank you.
I hope that's what you wanted, Kate.
Yes. Well, yes, indeed. Thank you very much. And what we'll do now is, let me just stop the recording. There we go.